we're back again. This is already the last talk for this session. I hope you enjoyed all the other ones and all this conference. I'm really happy to welcome Kathryn for this last talk for this edition. Please welcome Kathryn on stage. Hey, Kathryn, how are you?
Hey, I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm really happy to be with you and to have you today on stage.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. Wow, that's fun. That's awesome. And it's really awesome to me. It's we're gonna talk about accessibility and accessible components, and accessibility do matters for all of your users. So I'm really excited about this talk. Please, dear attendees, remember to ask your question in the Q&A panel in the Hopin platform. And Kathryn, the stage is yours.
Thanks so much. Hey there. I'm Kathryn Grayson Nanz, a developer advocate at Progress Software. I've been lucky enough to get to create a couple component libraries for different companies over the course of my career. And if you've ever thought about creating a component library or created one of your own, then you already know that one of the biggest considerations is accessibility. For those devs who haven't specialized in accessible development and may only know the basics, or not even that, building accessible components completely from scratch can be a daunting prospect. Let's start by talking a little bit about why accessibility is so important. A lot of times when we think about accessibility, we might think about people with permanent, obvious disabilities. And while those people are absolutely an important part of our user base, they're also not the only ones who benefit from accessible software. There are 5 major categories of disability: visual, hearing, motor, speech, and cognitive. Most people are likely to experience at least one of these at some point in their life, even if it's not a permanent situation. This is one of my all-time favorite graphics from Microsoft that does a fantastic job illustrating this concept. A lot of folks make the mistake of thinking about accessibility features as some kind of an edge case or a nice-to-have that's not really a requirement, when in reality, accessibility features will benefit every single one of your users. Anything you build for your hard of hearing users will also benefit your users who are on public transit without headphones, can't turn the sound on their device. Anything you build for your visually impaired users will also benefit your users who woke up that morning with a migraine and just cannot bear to look at a screen right now. We all need accessibility features, even when we think we don't. In fact, you probably already make use of accessibility features without even thinking about it. If you've ever used your operating system in dark mode, or adjusted the size of the text in your browser, or dictated your text to Siri, then you benefited from an accessibly designed application. As developers, it's our job to make sure that we've been thoughtful and intentional about how we build our software, so that it's as inclusive as humanly possible. But it's not only the kind and morally right thing to do, it's also quickly becoming a legal requirement. In fact, according to the UsableNet research team, in 2020, web, app, and video accessibility cases went up 25% year over year in the United States, and there were more than 3,500 total digital accessibility-related lawsuits that year. You can wait and see whether any of your users will choose to take legal action, or you can start focusing on accessibility now. Accessibility and meeting the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines criteria is just a part of having a digital presence now, in the same way that having a physical storefront would require you to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act criteria in the United States, or the Disability Discrimination Act criteria in the UK. This is one of those benefits of using a pre-made component library. You don't have to worry about doing this yourself. You can know that someone else has put in the time and the research to guarantee an accessible experience for your users. There are lots of great existing libraries out there if that's the path you want to take. I personally really like Kendo React, But there are also lots of very valid reasons why an out-of-the-box library just won't work for you or your situation. You'll need to create your own, or maybe just supplement an existing library with a handful of your own custom components. No matter the reason, if you're going to be making your own components, it's important to prioritize accessibility during your development process. Thankfully, Storybook, one of the most popular component library management systems, has a bunch of great add-ons that will make accessibility a natural part of your component creation. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 accessibility add-ons that I just can't live without anymore, as well as how to install and configure them so that they're most effective. I've created a demo, which you can find at github.com/KathrynGraysonNanz/accessible-storybook. You're welcome to clone it, use that for the base of your own Storybook instance, or you can just kind of poke around and try out the add-ons that I'm suggesting before you add them to your existing setup. That being said, let's go ahead and get into it. If you're starting completely from scratch, let's go ahead and set up your Storybook project. You can do this quickly and easily by using npx create react app to get your React app up and running, and then use npx sb init to install Storybook. Use npm run Storybook to check everything is working as intended, and that's it. Now we're ready to start customizing your setup for accessibility. For all of the add-ons in this list, you'll need to take the following steps to install and add them to your Storybook instance. First, install the add-on with npm install, whatever the name of the add-on is. For each add-on I talk about here, the name will be on the slide, so you can install it as we go, if you'd like. Next, you'll need to add the add-on to the add-ons section of your module.exports in the main.js file. Storybook installs with a few add-ons automatically included, so you'll just want to add your new add-on to that existing list. It should look like the code in this example. Then you'll want to make any additional adjustments specific to that add-on. There are a couple add-ons we'll talk about today which really benefit from some additional customization, and I've detailed that for each one when there are specific configurations that I recommend. Finally, you'll need to stop and restart your Storybook build in order to see those changes. This will always be the case anytime you add a new add-on or change the configuration of one that you already have installed. With all of the setup out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the add-ons themselves. With each one, I'll talk a little bit about what it does, why it matters, why I recommend it, and how to set it up, if there are any additional steps beyond the basic installation. Let's start with Add-on Ally. Add-on Ally is probably the most popular and beloved Storybook accessibility add-on, and for really good reason. It's packed with great features, and it runs on the well-known Axe accessibility engine. So how does it help you? This add-on does 2 main things. First, it adds a new panel to the add-ons drawer in Storybook, which will automatically run accessibility checks on your components as you work, and alert you of any violations, passes, or incomplete checks based off the WCAG accessibility guidelines, which are the industry standard. Second, it adds a new vision adjustment tool to the header, which can simulate blurred vision as well as many different varieties of color blindness, like red-green or blue-yellow color blindness. That accessibility panel is one of the best and easiest ways to test as you work in Storybook. Each time the component loads, it will check it against the WCAG, and you can make those changes while you're still in the build phase, rather than finishing something completely and then having to go back and try to retrospectively make it accessible. Each violation that appears will have a more info link that takes you to the WCAG website, where you can learn more about the guideline that your component hasn't met and how you can fix it. The vision simulators are also incredibly useful, as a way to literally see what your users will see when they use your components. These are great for checking font size, density, contrast, and your color choices. Sometimes it can feel hard to put ourselves into the shoes of our users, but this tool makes it literally just a click away. The primary way to configure this add-on centers around disabling or overriding the various rules that the add-on uses to check your stories. This should only be done if you are 100% confident that the add-on is throwing a false violation. Otherwise, you're just kind of ignoring the information that you asked it to show you. If needed, however, you can disable individual rules or all checks at either the individual component or global level for all your Storybook components. More detailed information on those options can be found in the add-on ally docs, but again, I'll urge you to proceed with caution. It won't do you any good to install an accessibility checker and then disable all the accessibility checks. Storybook Dark Mode is an add-on that allows you to easily toggle your Storybook UI, including the component preview panel, between light and dark mode. How does this help? You might be wondering why dark mode made the list of an accessibility talk in the first place. And the answer is lots of reasons. Dark mode is actually an important accessibility feature in and of itself for folks that struggle with migraines, light sensitivity, eye strain, and similar. Most developers already kind of know this, but just might not be thinking about it as an accessibility feature. But I'd bet the majority of developers you talk to have their code editor set to a dark theme in order to reduce the eye strain of staring at their computers all day. In addition, dark mode is often forgotten when you're running accessibility checks. Can you really guarantee that your color contrast is still good enough in dark mode, or that your focus highlight is still clearly visible? It's not enough to only be accessible in light mode. If you're offering multiple color themes, but only one of them is accessible, then you're not really offering multiple color themes to everyone, are you? This works really well when combined with the add-on ally add-on that we just talked about. Because if you have multiple themes enabled in Storybook, add-on ally can run those tests on your components under multiple conditions. These two add-ons together are a real powerhouse. Dark mode, however, is an add-on that really benefits from some advanced configuration, because it's important to make sure that your Storybook environment matches your application environment as closely as possible. Before we really dig into these customizations, though, it helps to understand a little bit about how Storybook itself works. The Storybook UI is kind of divided into two parts. There's the actual Storybook application frame that includes stuff like the sidebar menu, the add-ons drawer, etc. And then there's the component panel, which renders the component that you're building inside of an iframe. You can customize the Storybook theme however you like. In fact, a lot of companies take advantage of this for branding purposes, doing things like replacing the Storybook logo with their own, and updating the theme colors to match their brand colors. But beyond that, we can leverage this feature in order to replicate our application environment as closely as possible. So when we're running all these accessibility tests and checks, we know our components will still look and function exactly as intended, even when they're in our actual app and not Storybook. To customize this add-on, you'll want to add the following parameters for dark mode to your preview.js file. The code should look like this, and I've added comments above each line so you can tell what each one is doing. There's a lot of adjustments that we made here, so let's just take them in order, starting from the top down. First, let's talk about custom themes. The Storybook default dark mode will put your components over a pure black, like 000 hex background. But that's not usually how dark modes actually work. More often, you'll actually see dark mode themes that use a dark gray, or sometimes even a dark blue or purple instead of black. Since we want to make sure we are creating and testing our components in the same environment they'll be used, that means we need to create a custom theme in order to adjust the background value. The good news is, this is easy to do. You can create files for custom themes in the .storybook folder. The Storybook docs have a great rundown on all the details for theming, because there's a lot more that you can do, like all that branding stuff I mentioned before. But for this purpose, we're only really interested in changing the content panel background color. To do so, you'll create a custom dark theme that uses the Storybook dark theme as a base, but overwrites the app content BG value. This theme code should look just like this, but replace that 121212 hex color with whatever your dark mode base color is. Now that we have our custom theme, we can import that into preview.js and use it when setting the dark parameter in the dark mode add-on configuration. You can see our import statement at the top, where we import custom dark theme and then use it to override the default dark theme. The next parameter defines the light mode with themes.normal and @bg white. In this case, we don't actually want to make any changes to the light mode theme, so we're just kind of importing it at the top of the page and using the Storybook default. That's that import themes from Storybook/theming line. But for some applications, light mode might not be pure white. Kind of the same situation. It could be a light cream or something similar. If this is your situation, you could also create a custom light theme and then use it here in place of themes.normal, exactly the same way we did with the dark mode theme. After that, we set the default theme with current light. This line of code tells Storybook whether to start in light or dark mode. It feels like a little thing, but if you're really working on your dark mode styling, you will quickly tire of toggling the mode in the header over and over, so this is really handy to have. Then, we need to set the class names for your dark and light modes with dark class and light class. These are what allow you to match Storybook CSS to the CSS in your application by changing the names of the dark and light mode classes that will be applied to the Storybook UI. If your app uses a dark mode class called Night, for example, you want to change that here and make sure that Storybook is using the same class name. That way you can easily write and test CSS that will work in both places. In this example, our light mode class is called Light, and our dark mode class is called Lights Out. The final step is small, but important. Because Storybook renders your component inside an iframe in the content panel, any styles we apply to the Storybook UI won't naturally cascade. Overall, this is honestly a good thing. We don't want those Storybook UI styles all up in our components. But there is one exception to that rule, and that's those light and dark mode classes that we just defined in the last step. Setting style preview to true tells Storybook to also apply those dark and light mode class names to the component preview window iframe, as well as the main application body. If you don't do this, you won't be able to use the dark or light mode class names in your component styles, since they'll only have been applied to the Storybook UI body tag and not the body tag inside the iframe. Setting style preview to true fixes that potential pitfall. With all of those adjustments in place, you now have light and dark themes in Storybook that exactly match your application colors, and you can get to work on building and testing your components knowing that the environment perfectly mimics that of your software. Next, let's take a look at Add-on Screen Reader. Add-on Screen Reader is a very cool add-on that adds a basic screen reader right into Storybook. No external software needed. How does it help? Well, it allows you to test your application, how it would work with a screen reader, super easily. We don't always think about how our websites would sound, but to our users who use a screen reader, it's incredibly important. Things like forgetting alt text or using a bunch of emojis are really common mistakes that you could easily catch if you were testing with a screen reader as you worked. Screen readers also make heavy use of your HTML structure to guide the user through the page. So if you're not using semantic HTML already, you will definitely feel that pain point with this. When a screen reader or any other sort of assistive device scans your page, it gets information about the DOM. It then uses that information to tell the user about the structure of the page. For example, most screen readers have settings where the user can instruct them to read only the headers on the page or only the links. This allows screen readers to mimic the visual skimming of a page in order to quickly find users the information that they need. There are also other ways that screen readers rely on semantic HTML in order to provide context to the user. Things like announcing how many items are in a list or differentiating between main article content and sidebar content. However, none of this can happen if your page is just a div soup, or if you're using HTML elements in ways they weren't intended, like tables for layout purposes and not data organization. While this basic version of a screen reader is not quite as full-featured as an actual screen reader would be, it's a great way to make sure that you are checking the box on the basics while you're working. Then you can circle back with more in-depth testing later. The biggest benefit, in my opinion, to all of these add-ons is the ability to integrate them seamlessly into your workflow. While having a full screen reader might give you a more accurate experience, it also might not be something that you'd go out of your way to enable every single time that you're coding. With this, It's already right here in your Storybook add-ons drawer, and you have no excuse not to be using it while building your components to at least ensure you've got the box checked on the basics. Even better news after that last complicated add-on, this one is plug and play. Just install it like any other add-on using the instructions we talked through earlier, and a panel will be added to the drawer called Screen Reader. You can use that to toggle the voice and text reader options on and off. Voice Reader will read aloud the elements on the page, as a screen reader would, while Text Reader puts the text captions of the Voice Reader in a small section at the bottom of the drawer. If you're building any kind of component that will populate new data on the screen, the ARIA Live Storybook add-on is here to help you do so accessibly. If you're unfamiliar with ARIA Live, it's an attribute that you add to your HTML elements in order to let screen readers know that the element is going to change dynamically, and that the screen reader should keep an eye on that element specifically in order to tell the user about any changes. If you don't do this, new content or elements added to the page could be missed by assistive devices, and your users might not even know they exist. This is especially useful if your app includes any kind of notification system, things that will appear based on your users' actions. You can set two different types of ARIA Live announcements, polite and assertive. Polite should be used in most cases. Assertive is only used when you need to interrupt a user's actions to announce critical, truly urgent updates to the page. Think like an announcement banner that informs the user they'll be logged out in 60 seconds unless they click to extend their active session. That would be a good case to be assertive and not polite. This add-on adds a new panel to the drawer called ARIA Live Regions, which will show you any time an action triggers an ARIA Live announcement, as well as whether it was polite or assertive. This way, you can confirm that the announcements are triggering correctly when new content is added to the page, and that the correct type of announcement is being made. This add-on also requires no configuration. You can just add the ARIA Live attribute to the HTML element in your component, and it will automatically add announcements to the panel in the drawer whenever one is generated. Finally, let's talk about pseudostates. Storybook add-on pseudostates allows you to quickly toggle through all possible element pseudostates from the Storybook menu bar. You can see here in our example image, you get all the standards: active, focus, focus visible, focus within, hover, link, target, and visited. So what's this do for you? This add-on basically duplicates the functionality of the Toggle Element State tool from your DevTools, but without you ever having to leave Storybook. Pseudostates are incredibly important for accessible development, especially the focus and focus within states. Any users who use a keyboard as their primary method of navigation will need a clearly visible focus in order to find their way around. Some elements, like buttons or inputs, have focus states built in, but occasionally you'll need to add a focus state to something that wouldn't automatically have one, like a div. Most designers also like to customize the look of the focus state, since that default blue highlight might not necessarily match your application look and feel. So being able to easily design, develop, and test these within Storybook is a huge advantage. This is also super useful for checking colors and contrast on your hover, active, and visited states, things that are often overlooked. If you have a button that's only clearly readable when it's not being hovered on, then you don't really have an accessible button. So you might be thinking, what's the big perk to using this over DevTools? You even just said it does the same thing. And that is mostly true, but there's one important additional feature that just needs a little bit of configuration to get working. With this add-on, I highly recommend taking advantage of this customization option, the ability to set your Storybook components to automatically have certain pseudostates enabled on load. You can do this by adding a new set of parameters to your component story.jsx file, where you export your story variations. The code will look like this example. You can see here our primary parameters. We have a pseudo, and inside that, we're setting hover and focus to true. You'll need to add that pseudo section to the parameters for your story variant, and then you can set any pseudostates you want active on load to true. You can also, as you see in the example, set more than one to true at the same time. In fact, set as many states active at once as you'd like. This can be really handy because it allows you to check for any conflicts between them or styles that might not work well together. You'll still be able to toggle the pseudostates on and off manually from the menu bar, but now they'll load with whatever you listed automatically enabled. This is especially nice if you are workshopping the CSS for a specific pseudostate, or even better, when you're testing your pseudostates. That way you don't have to enable them manually every single time. So, you ready to get to work? Those are my recommended set of accessibility add-ons for Storybook, as well as how to install and configure them. With all of these set up for your component library, you will never have to go out of your way to write or test accessible components again. So no more excuses. Accessibility isn't something extra or just a nice to have. It's a required feature that we need to be considering early in our process and building for from the very beginning. It's totally okay to not be the expert here. These tools and so many others like them are there to support your development of accessible components, even if you don't know everything. And the more you do it, the better you'll get. But what's not okay is to just give up and ignore accessibility entirely, or decide that it's just not needed for your application. We are all capable of creating accessible applications. We just need to prioritize it. And tools like these can help make it a natural part of your process. Get your Storybook instance configured for accessibility and see just how easy it can be to create beautiful, accessible components without any major changes to your existing workflow. I know you can do it, and your users will thank you for it. Happy coding!
Wow, great! Thank you very much. It was really awesome. The fact that accessibility is definitely mandatory, but often left from the rest of the development of the application. It's not an easy task, and having a set of tools dedicated all that we could use to improve the accessibility is definitely a good way to go. So we've got a few questions. If you don't mind to jump in a few Q&A session. First thing is, what could be the benefit of providing accessibility tools at an early stage rather than just testing accessibility at the end of the process of development?
Yeah, it's definitely beneficial to add them in as early as possible, because a lot of times we have really good intentions, I think, of coming back and checking them later. But when you get that close and other people start to see like, oh, well, the feature's done, right? Like I can use it, it's working, like we can ship this. It gets really hard to push back and say, well, actually, we're not really done with accessibility testing yet. The more we can kind of build that in from the get-go, the more we don't have to worry about getting the same kind of buy-in for it later when the time pressure is on. I would also argue that it's a little bit easier to do it early in the process rather than building something and then trying to like reverse engineer how to make it accessible after you've built it. But to have all those tools and be able to work on that in the same kind of space where you're already building your components from the beginning, it will make it feel a lot easier and a lot more natural. And the more you do it, the more it will just become an automatic part of your workflow.
Yeah. Sounds legit, definitely. Despite the fact that there's a lot of evangelizing task and evangelizing job around the accessibility for at least the last 10 years and probably more, it's often complex for junior developers that are not accustomed to accessibility. So how to start and where to start. So is there a good place to start? How to work in an accessibility mindset when you start developing? What are your tips on it?
I would say as far as resources, definitely the WCAG guidelines are kind of the holy Bible of accessibility guidance. That's where a lot of the guidelines are set and what a lot of the kind of accessibility checkers are based on. That's really like the best information that you can get right from the source. I also really like the Axe DQ. They have they actually create software to help you accessibility check, and you can get it or you can't get it. Honestly, like it's nice, but even if you can't afford it, they have a huge amount of resources in their blog, just kind of talking through different pieces of accessibility and how to approach it and what's important, and kind of just news to help you keep on top of what's new and what's different. So I would really recommend them. But the other thing I would kind of say is that I think a lot of us will kind of psych ourselves out and be like, oh, I don't know enough about accessibility. Like, I'm not a subject matter expert, so I'm going to let that be somebody else's job. Or I only know a couple of things, so like it's not really worth it. But it's worth including whatever you can, even if you kind of swing and miss sometimes, I would say. Put in what you can, as many accessibility features as you can manage. And even if it's not 100%, even if it's not hitting that like perfect lighthouse score or whatever, it's better than it was before. And every little piece matters because it makes a difference to your users. Every piece you add is one user who can use your software who couldn't before, and they matter. So do what you can, even if you're not the best yet.
Yeah, it's always better than nothing, definitely. Talking about the React ecosystem, is there any React framework or toolkit that you recommend that could enforce accessibility when developing your application? Is there something better than another? If you have something in mind.
I don't know that there's anything that's kind of inherently better. I'm kind of like running through a quick list in my mind to see if there's anything that's like, oh yeah, they're really great. But in general, a lot of the accessibility features actually come down to that kind of like semantic HTML and making sure that the actual code that ends up in the browser, because that's really what it comes down to, right? Is that like we create all this stuff in React and it gets compiled, and then when the browser reads it, it's HTML and CSS, and that's where the accessibility features need to be. So as long as you're kind of thinking in that regard when you're writing your JSX, and when you're creating your application and thinking about how it will change and what new elements it will place on the page, that's, I would say, more important than any specific framework, to just kind of keep an eye on what the output looks like.
Okay, cool. Okay, that's all for me, I guess. So thank you very much again for being here and being with us for this awesome talk. I hope you enjoyed it, and for us it was definitely awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. This was amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. See you later. Bye bye.
Bye.